The town of Denali Ridge had seen many marriages, but none like this. A 19-year-old black woman with fire in her eyes, forced to stand beside an Athabaskan stranger whose silence was as vast as the tundra itself. When he placed that gift in her trembling hands, even the preacher forgot his words, and the crowd fell so quiet you could hear the snow beginning to fall outside. Before we dive in, if stories like this move you, tales of impossible choices and unexpected love, hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment letting me know where you're reading from. Tomorrow brings another story just as powerful as this one, and you won't want to miss it. Now, let's begin. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the door of the small cabin Clara Thompson shared with her grandmother on the outskirts of Denali Ridge, Alaska. Clara had been kneading bread dough, her hands coated in flour, when she heard the soft whisper of paper against wood. She wiped her palms on her apron and bent to retrieve it, expecting another notice about unpaid bills or her grandmother's medication refills. Instead, she found heavy cream-colored paper, expensive to the touch, with her name written in elegant script across the front. No return address. No stamp. Hand-delivered, then. Clara's stomach tightened as she broke the wax seal, an ornate letter A pressed into deep burgundy. The words inside were formal, cold, and utterly devastating. Miss Clara Thompson, you are hereby informed that the debt incurred by your late father, Samuel Thompson, in the sum of $47,000, is now due in full. As per the original agreement signed 12 years prior, failure to repay said debt by the 1st of next month will result in the forfeiture of all family property and assets. However, an alternative arrangement has been proposed by the creditor, Mr. Nathaniel Amarok of the Athabaskan community, which may satisfy the obligation in its entirety. You are requested to present yourself at the Amarok estate this Saturday at 2 o'clock to discuss terms. The paper slipped from Clara's fingers and drifted to the floor like a dying leaf. $47,000. Her father had been dead for 8 years, killed in a fishing accident when she was only 11. How could there still be debt? And who was Nathaniel Amarok? Child? What's wrong? Her grandmother, Ruby, emerged from the back room, her silver hair pulled into its customary bun, her dark eyes sharp despite her 73 years. Clara couldn't speak. She simply pointed to the letter on the floor. Ruby picked it up with fingers bent by arthritis, her lips moving silently as she read. When she finished, she lowered herself slowly into the nearest chair, suddenly looking every one of her years. The Amaroks, Ruby whispered. Lord have mercy. Grandma, what is this? What debt? Daddy never mentioned. Your father. Ruby's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and started again. Your father made a deal when your mama got sick. Cancer treatment isn't cheap, baby, and we didn't have insurance. Nathaniel's father, Thomas Amarok, was known for lending money to folks who had nowhere else to turn. But the interest... She shook her head. The interest was steep. But Mama died anyway. Clara's voice came out hollow. Her mother had passed when Clara was 9, after 2 years of brutal treatments that had drained their savings and, apparently, left them drowning in debt. The debt didn't die with her. Or with your father. Ruby folded the letter carefully, as if handling something dangerous. I thought maybe they'd forgotten. It's been so long. An alternative arrangement, Clara read over her grandmother's shoulder. What does that mean? Ruby's silence was answer enough. Clara's breath caught. No. No, Grandma, they can't mean. Go to the meeting on Saturday, Ruby said quietly. Hear what they have to say. Maybe it's not what we think. But Clara could see the truth in her grandmother's eyes. She knew exactly what the Amaroks wanted. Saturday arrived wrapped in the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache. Clara stood before her small mirror, adjusting the collar of her only good dress, a simple navy blue she'd worn to her high school graduation just over a year ago. Her reflection showed a young woman with warm brown skin, thick natural hair pulled back into a conservative bun, and eyes that held more determination than fear, though the fear was certainly there, lurking beneath the surface. She was 19 years old. She'd been planning to attend the community college in Fairbanks next fall, maybe study nursing. She'd been saving every penny from her job at the general store, counting down the days until she could build a life beyond Denali Ridge, 600 souls and endless winters. Now, as she pulled on her warmest coat and stepped into the biting wind, those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else. The Amarok estate sat 3 miles outside town, a sprawling compound that blended traditional Athabaskan structures with modern construction. The main house was built of dark wood and stone, with high windows that reflected the winter sky like closed eyes. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and Clara could see several smaller buildings scattered across the property: workshops, storage sheds, what looked like a greenhouse impossibly full of green in this frozen landscape. She'd heard stories about the Amaroks all her life. They were one of the oldest Athabaskan families in the region, with roots that stretched back centuries before Alaska became a state. They owned the largest fishing operation in the area, plus timber rights, real estate in Fairbanks, and investments that reached all the way to Seattle. They kept to themselves mostly, conducting their business with efficiency and fairness, but always maintaining a distance from the rest of Denali Ridge's more mixed population. Clara had never met any of them. Not once in 19 years. She knocked on the heavy wooden door, each rap echoing in the still air. A woman answered, Athabaskan, perhaps 50 years old, with long black hair threaded with silver and traditional tattoos marking her chin. Her expression was neutral but not unkind. Miss Thompson. Please, come in. The interior was warm and smelled of cedar and something cooking: salmon, Clara realized, and fresh bread. The main room was vast, with exposed beams overhead and a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. Traditional woven blankets hung on the walls alongside more modern art, and the furniture looked handcrafted, sturdy and beautiful. I am Naomi Amarok, the woman said, taking Clara's coat. Nathaniel's aunt. Please, sit. Would you like tea? No, thank you. Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'd like to understand what this meeting is about. Naomi's expression softened slightly. Direct. Good. Nathaniel appreciates directness. She gestured to a large wooden chair near the fire. He'll be here shortly. He's just finishing up in the workshop. Clara sat, her back rigid, hands folded in her lap. She counted her heartbeats: 143 before she heard footsteps approaching. The man who entered the room was not what she expected. Nathaniel Amarok was perhaps 28 or 30, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that changed the air in a room. His skin was the deep bronze of his Athabaskan heritage, his black hair pulled back in a simple tail at the nape of his neck. He wore work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt rolled to his elbows, boots that had seen real labor. But what struck Clara most were his eyes. Dark, almost black, and utterly unreadable. He didn't smile. Didn't offer pleasantries. He simply crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite her, his gaze never leaving her face. Miss Thompson. Thank you for coming. His voice was deep, quiet, with an accent that spoke of 2 languages living in one throat. I didn't have much choice, Clara replied. A flicker of something. Amusement? Respect? Crossed his features. No. I suppose you didn't. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'll be direct because I believe you value your time. Your father's debt is real and it is due. My father's ledger was very clear. $47,000 plus 12 years of compounded interest brings the total to $63,418. Clara's vision swam. 63,000. It might as well have been $1 million. I don't have that kind of money. I work at the general store. I make $9 an hour. I know. Nathaniel's expression didn't change. Which is why my father included an alternative clause in the original agreement. Your father signed it, though I doubt he thought it would ever come to this. What clause? Marriage. The word fell between them like a stone. A union between our families to settle the debt completely. No money. No property seizure. Just a wedding. Clara's laugh was sharp and bitter. You can't be serious. This isn't the 19th century. You can't just. The contract is legal. Naomi spoke from where she stood near the fireplace. I've had 3 lawyers review it. Your father's signature is notarized. The terms are clear. So I'm supposed to just marry you. Clara turned back to Nathaniel. A complete stranger? To pay off a debt I didn't even know existed. Yes. The simple honesty of it was almost worse than a lie would have been. And if I refuse? Then the debt is called in full, Nathaniel said. Your grandmother's cabin will be seized. Her property, her belongings, everything. The bank will take it all, and what they take, my family will buy at auction. She'll have nothing. At 73, in the middle of an Alaskan winter, with her health. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. Why? Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. Why would you want this? You could have anyone. You're clearly wealthy, she gestured vaguely at him. You could marry someone from your own community. Someone who actually wants this. For the first time, Nathaniel's mask cracked slightly. Something that might have been sadness or resignation flickered across his face. My father made me promise, he said quietly. Before he died last year. He said the debt needed to be settled, one way or another. He also said, and Nathaniel paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. He said that sometimes the old ways and the new ways need to meet in the middle. That our family has taken too much from this land, from these people, without giving back. That a union between families, between cultures could be a bridge. I don't want to be a bridge, Clara said. I want to be a person with my own life. I know. And for a moment, Nathaniel's eyes held genuine regret. I'm sorry, Miss Thompson. But I am bound by my father's wishes as much as you are bound by your father's debts. Clara stood abruptly. I need to think. The wedding would be in 3 weeks, Naomi said gently. The first Saturday of December. That gives you time to prepare. Or she glanced at Nathaniel. To say goodbye to your old life. 3 weeks. Clara's hands were shaking now. That's not enough time to. It's all the time there is, Nathaniel said, standing as well. The debt comes due December 1st. The wedding must happen before then. Clara walked to the door in a daze. As Naomi handed her the coat, Clara turned back to look at Nathaniel one more time. What kind of man forces a woman to marry him? Nathaniel held her gaze steadily. A man who honors his father's dying wishes. Even when they cost him everything he thought he wanted. And in that moment, Clara realized with chilling certainty that Nathaniel Amarok was as trapped by this arrangement as she was. The walk back to her grandmother's cabin felt like moving through water. Clara's legs carried her forward mechanically while her mind spun in endless, desperate circles. Just 21 days until she became Mrs. Nathaniel Amarok, wife to a man whose face she'd barely studied, whose voice she'd heard speak fewer than 100 words, whose life was as foreign to her as the surface of the moon. Ruby was waiting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea gone cold in front of her. She looked up when Clara entered, and whatever she saw in her granddaughter's face made her close her eyes. So it's true, then. Clara nodded, unable to trust her voice. She hung her coat on its peg by the door and moved to the stove, needing something to do with her hands. She put the kettle on, though she had no desire for tea. December 1st, Clara finally said. 3 weeks from today. Ruby pressed her fingers to her temples. Lord, have mercy on us all. Did you know? Clara turned to face her. Did you know about this clause in the contract? No, baby. I swear I didn't. Ruby's voice was thick with unshed tears. Your daddy, he never told me the details. Just said he'd borrowed money for your mama's treatments, and he'd pay it back somehow. I thought maybe he'd worked it out before the accident, or maybe. She shook her head. I should have asked more questions. Should have made him tell me everything. It's not your fault. Clara came to sit beside her grandmother, taking the weathered hand in her own. None of this is your fault. Or mine. But now we have to figure out what to do. What can we do? We don't have $60,000. We don't have $6,000. Ruby's laugh was brittle. We barely have $600 in savings. Clara had already been doing the math in her head all the way home. Even if she worked double shifts at the general store, even if Ruby sold her mother's jewelry and Clara's father's tools, even if they somehow scraped together every penny they could find, it wouldn't be enough. Not even close. I could run, Clara said quietly. Leave Alaska. Go to Seattle or Portland or somewhere they can't find me. And leave me here to face them alone. Ruby shook her head. No, child. Besides, the Amaroks have reach. They'd find you eventually, and then things would be even worse. The kettle began to whistle, a sharp sound that cut through the heavy air. Clara stood to pour the water, watching the steam rise and dissipate, wondering if her future would dissolve just as easily. Tell me about him, Clara said. About Nathaniel. What do people say? Ruby was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Not much, truth be told. The Amaroks keep to themselves. But what I have heard is that he's fair in business. Pays his workers well. His fishing crews speak highly of him. After his father died, he took over the company and actually improved conditions, better safety equipment, higher wages, health insurance for everyone. So he's not a monster. No. But he's not a man you know, either. That might be worse, in its way. Clara brought the fresh tea to the table and sat down heavily. Through the window, she could see the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. 21 days from now, she'd be watching these same stars from a different window, in a different house, as a different person. What was Daddy thinking? The question burst out of her, raw and furious. How could he sign something like that? How could he promise me to someone like I was property to be traded? Different times, Ruby said softly. And your daddy was desperate. You remember how sick your mama was at the end? The pain she was in. He would have signed anything, promised anything, if he thought it might save her. She reached across to squeeze Clara's hand. He loved you fiercely, Clara. He never would have thought it would come to this. He probably figured he'd work himself to death paying it off before you ever had to know. Well, he did work himself to death, Clara said bitterly. And here I am anyway. They sat in silence as full darkness fell outside. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. Closer, the old cabin creaked and settled around them, the only home Clara had ever known. I'll do it, Clara finally said. I'll marry him. But not because I want to. Because I won't let them take this house from you. I won't let you freeze or starve because of Daddy's mistakes and my pride. Ruby's tears finally spilled over. Oh, baby. You shouldn't have to sacrifice yourself like this. What choice do I have? Clara's voice was steady now, hardened by acceptance. At least this way, you're safe. The house stays ours. And maybe as she paused, trying to find some small hope in the darkness. Maybe it won't be as bad as I'm imagining. But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. News traveled fast in Denali Ridge. By Monday morning, everyone in town knew that Clara Thompson was engaged to Nathaniel Amarok. The whispers started the moment she walked into Miller's general store for her shift. Janet Miller, the owner's wife, was restocking canned goods when Clara arrived. She looked up with eyes full of pity and curiosity in equal measure. Clara, honey. I heard. Is it true? Clara tied on her apron and moved to the register, not meeting Janet's gaze. Yes. And is it really happening? In 3 weeks? Yes. Janet made a small sound of distress. that poor boy of mine has been sweet on you since sophomore year. This is going to break Tommy's heart. Tommy Miller was a nice enough man now, Clara supposed, who'd asked her to homecoming twice and prom once. She'd turned him down gently each time, not because he wasn't kind or decent, but because there'd never been any spark. Now she almost laughed at the irony. She'd held out for something more than nice enough, and instead she was getting an arranged marriage to a stranger. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller. Don't you apologize. This isn't what you're doing. Janet came closer, lowering her voice. Is it true what they say? About your father's debt? Clara's hand stilled on the register keys. People are talking about that. Honey, people are talking about everything. You know how it is. Janet's expression softened. But most folks are on your side. They know the Amaroks, for all their money and standing, shouldn't be able to force a young woman into marriage just to settle a debt. It's medieval. It's legal, Clara said flatly. That's all that matters. The bell over the door chimed, and old Mr. Peterson shuffled in, leaning heavily on his cane. He taught Clara's father in school, back when Denali Ridge had enough children for a full classroom. Morning, Clara. Janet. He made his way to the counter. Heard your news, girl. Marrying into the Amarok family. That's quite something. Clara forced a smile. Yes, sir. Nathaniel's a good man, Mr. Peterson continued, obliviously ignoring the tension in Clara's shoulders. Quiet, keeps to himself, but he's done right by this town since his daddy passed. Could do worse, I suppose. Could do better, too, Janet muttered. Like marrying someone she actually chose. Mr. Peterson waved a dismissive hand. Young people these days think marriage is all about feelings and butterflies. Sometimes it's about duty, about family, about doing what needs doing. Clara here understands that. Don't you, girl? Clara's jaw tightened. I understand that I don't have a choice, if that's what you mean. The old man's expression flickered something that might have been shame or sympathy before he turned to study the shelves. Well, I'll just get my tobacco and be on my way. The day continued like that. Every customer had something to say. Some were sympathetic, like young Anna Chen, who worked at the post office and squeezed Clara's hand while fighting back tears. Others were coldly practical, like Mrs. Blackwood, who ran the diner and said, "At least you'll be taken care of. The Amaroks have money. That's more than most of us can say." And some, like Reverend Paul from the church, were openly disapproving. "This isn't right," he said, his face red with righteous anger. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not a business transaction. If you want, Clara, I'll speak to the Amaroks. I'll tell them this goes against everything the church stands for." "Thank you, Reverend," Clara said tiredly. "But I don't think it'll make a difference. The law is on their side." "The law isn't always right," he countered. "There's a higher law, and it says you can't force someone to." "Please." Clara cut him off, suddenly exhausted. "Please, I appreciate your concern. But it's happening whether anyone approves or not. The best thing anyone can do for me is just let me get through it." He left, shaking his head, muttering about modern barbarism. By the time her shift ended at 5, Clara felt hollowed out. She walked home through the early darkness, pulling her coat tight against the wind. Snow was beginning to fall, small dry flakes that stung her cheeks. She found Ruby in the kitchen with a visitor, Naomi Amarok, Nathaniel's aunt, sitting at their humble table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Miss Thompson." Naomi stood when Clara entered. "I hope you don't mind. Your grandmother kindly invited me in from the cold." Clara looked at Ruby, who gave a small, helpless shrug. "I came to discuss the wedding arrangements," Naomi continued. "And to bring you something." She gestured to the table, where several boxes lay waiting. Clara approached slowly, as if they might bite. "Open them," Naomi said gently. The first box contained beautiful, expensive fabric in shades of cream and white, embroidered with delicate patterns. "Wedding dress material," Clara realized. The second box held books, 3 of them, old and worn. Clara opened one and found it was written in a language she didn't recognize. The second was in English, but the words were archaic, strange. The third appeared to be a mixture of both. What are these? Athabaskan history and traditions, Naomi explained. If you're going to be part of our family, you should understand where you're coming from. Where we come from? She paused. Nathaniel wanted you to have them. He thought you might want to know. Clara ran her fingers over the aged pages, feeling something shift in her chest. It was the first sign that Nathaniel saw her as something more than an obligation. The first indication that he might care, even slightly, about making this easier for her. And this, Naomi opened the third box, is tradition. Inside lay a necklace of intricate beadwork in blues and whites, with what looked like carved bone or ivory pieces worked into the design. It was stunning, clearly old, clearly precious. This belonged to Nathaniel's mother, Naomi said softly. She wore it at her wedding. And her mother before her. It's customary for the Amarok brides to wear it. Clara couldn't touch it. It felt too real, too final. I can't take this. You must. It's tradition. Naomi's voice was firm but kind. I know this isn't what you would have chosen, Clara. But you are becoming part of our family, and that means something to us. We don't take it lightly. Neither does Nathaniel. He has a strange way of showing it, Clara said, forcing me into this marriage. He's not forcing you, Ruby said quietly. The debt is forcing you. Nathaniel is just the vehicle. That's a generous interpretation. Naomi closed the boxes carefully. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But I want you to understand something about Nathaniel. He doesn't want this either. Not like this. He's following his father's wishes because in our culture, that's not optional. Family loyalty, honoring the dead, these things matter more than personal happiness. They matter more than my personal happiness too, apparently, Clara said bitterly. Yes, Naomi agreed simply. They do. That may not be fair, but it's the truth. The question now is what you do with that truth. You can spend the next 3 weeks and possibly the rest of your life being bitter about what was taken from you. Or you can try to understand, to adapt, maybe even to find something good in all this. Clara wanted to rage at her, to throw her out of the house along with her beautiful gifts and her calm wisdom. But she was too tired, and some part of her knew that Naomi wasn't the enemy here. I'll think about it, Clara finally said. Naomi nodded, apparently satisfied with that non-answer. The wedding will be at the Amarok estate. Both Christian and traditional Athabaskan elements. We'll need you to come for fittings and to learn some of the customs. If you're willing. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, Naomi said. But some choices cost more than others. After Naomi left, Clara and Ruby sat together in the growing darkness, not bothering to light more than one lamp. The boxes sat on the table between them, monuments to a future Clara couldn't yet wrap her mind around. Maybe she's right, Ruby said eventually. Maybe there's some good to be found in this, if you look hard enough. Clara picked up the necklace, feeling its weight in her hands. It was beautiful. That much was undeniable. And it represented something, not ownership, perhaps, but belonging. Continuity. Connection. She just wasn't sure she wanted to belong to a family that had bought her like property. 3 weeks, Clara whispered. And then everything changes. Everything has already changed, Ruby said. The wedding is just making it official. Clara couldn't argue with that. She'd lost her old life the moment she'd opened that letter. Now all she could do was try to survive the new one. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering Denali Ridge in white. A blank slate, Clara thought. A fresh start was forced upon her. She just hoped she'd survive long enough to see what was written on it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations that felt more like a funeral than a wedding. Clara went through the motions: dress fittings at the Amarok estate, meetings with Naomi about ceremony traditions, awkward conversations with the few friends she had about what to do with her belongings. Through it all, she barely saw Nathaniel himself. He was always working, Naomi explained. The fishing business didn't stop for weddings, even arranged ones. Clara told herself she was grateful for his absence. It was easier to accept this fate when she didn't have to look into the eyes of the man who was claiming her. But late at night, alone in her small bedroom, she couldn't help but wonder about him. What was he thinking? Did he lie awake too, dreading December 1st? Or had he made peace with this transaction more easily than she had? On the Wednesday before the wedding, Clara was folding her meager wardrobe into boxes when someone knocked at the cabin door. Ruby was at a doctor's appointment in Fairbanks. Her arthritis had been acting up, so Clara was alone when she opened the door to find Nathaniel Amarok standing on her porch. He looked different than he had at their first meeting. Tired, she realized. There were shadows under his dark eyes, and his usual stoic expression seemed harder to maintain. "Miss Thompson. May I come in?" Clara stepped aside, too surprised to do anything else. Nathaniel ducked through the doorway. He was taller than she'd remembered and stood awkwardly in the small living room, looking around at the worn furniture and faded curtains with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Your grandmother isn't here. Doctor's appointment. She'll be back in a few hours." Clara crossed her arms, defensive. "Did you need something?" "I wanted to talk to you. Before the wedding." He gestured to the couch. "May I?" Clara nodded, and they both sat, maintaining careful distance between them. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and thick. "I've been told," Nathaniel finally said, "that I'm handling this poorly. That I've been absent when I should have been present. Naomi says you must think I don't care about any of this. Do you?" The question came out sharper than Clara intended. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I care that you're being forced into something you don't want. I care that my father's honor is coming at the cost of your freedom. I care that." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I care more than I've shown." "Then why go through with it?" Clara leaned forward. "If you actually care, why not just forgive the debt? You're wealthy. What's $60,000 to you? It's not about the money." Nathaniel's voice was quiet but firm. "It's about a promise made between fathers. It's about honoring agreements, even when they cost us. If I break my father's word, I dishonor his memory and everything he stood for. And what about honoring me? My choices? My life? I know." He looked down at his large, calloused, worker's hands despite his wealth. "I know it's not fair. I know I'm asking you to sacrifice everything for a tradition you don't understand and a culture you're not part of. But I'm trapped by this too, Clara. Maybe not in the same way, but trapped all the same." It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his deep, accented voice did something strange to her heart, not attraction exactly, but recognition. They were both prisoners of their father's choices, inmates of the same invisible cell. "What did you want to be?" Clara asked suddenly. "Before all this. Before you had to run the family business and honor your father's dying wishes. What did you actually want?" Nathaniel looked surprised by the question. He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. "Then, a teacher. I wanted to teach Athabaskan language and history. Preserve the old stories before they're lost." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Ironic, isn't it? I wanted to preserve tradition, and now tradition is destroying any chance I had at the life I imagined." "Did you?" Clara hesitated. "Did you have someone? Before this arrangement?" "There was someone." His voice was carefully neutral. "She understood when I explained the promise to my father. Or she said she did. But when she realized I was serious, that I would actually go through with marrying you, she left. Moved to Anchorage. I haven't heard from her since." Clara felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. I'm sorry. Don't be. If she couldn't accept this part of me, the part that keeps promises no matter the cost, then we wouldn't have worked anyway. He turned to look at Clara directly. What about you? Is there someone who? No. Clara cut him off. No one serious. I was too busy saving money for college, planning my escape from this town. Funny how that worked out. They sat with that shared loss between them, the futures they'd both imagined, now impossible. Outside, the afternoon light was already fading. Alaska in late November hoarded daylight like a miser. I want to make you a promise, Nathaniel said. Not a legal one. Not one bound by contracts or debt. Just a promise between us. Clara waited. I won't touch you, he said quietly. Not unless you want me to. This marriage may be required by law and honor, but I won't force intimacy. You'll have your own room. Your own space. I'll tell people we're waiting, that it's a cultural thing, whatever you want me to say. But you don't have to, we don't have to. He struggled with the words. Thank you. Clara's throat was tight. It was such a small thing, but in a situation where she had no control, this one concession felt enormous. That means more than you know. And second, Nathaniel continued, I want you to keep pursuing your dreams. If you want to go to college, I'll pay for it. If you want to study nursing or anything else, I'll support it. This marriage doesn't have to be a cage. It can become a partnership. Or at least, I'd like to try to make it one. Clara studied his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion and sincerity in equal measure. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. You already have what you want. The wedding is happening. You don't have to pretend. I'm not pretending. Nathaniel's gaze was steady. And I don't have what I want. I have what I'm obligated to have. There's a difference. He stood, moving toward the door. I should go. I just wanted you to know that I see you, Clara. Not as property or an obligation, but as a person whose life is being upended because of my family's demands. I can't change what's happening, but I can at least acknowledge the cost. He was almost out the door when Clara spoke. Wait. He turned back. The books your aunt brought. The ones about Athabaskan traditions. I've been reading them. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe pleasure. And they're beautiful. The stories, the history. I don't understand all of it yet, but... She paused, trying to find the right words. I'm trying. To understand. Do not go into this completely blind. For the first time since she'd met him, Nathaniel smiled. It transformed his face completely, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, more vulnerable. That's more than I hoped for, he said. Thank you, Clara. After he left, Clara sat for a long time in the gathering darkness, replaying the conversation in her head. She'd expected a monster or at least an indifferent businessman. Instead, she'd found someone almost as trapped as she was. Someone trying, in his own limited way, to make an impossible situation slightly less terrible. It didn't make the marriage right. It didn't erase her anger or fear. But it made Nathaniel Amarok into something more complex than a villain. And Clara wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The day before the wedding, Clara stood in front of the mirror at the Amarok estate while Naomi made final adjustments to her dress. The fabric was softer than anything Clara had ever worn, the embroidery more intricate than she could have imagined. Traditional Athabaskan patterns mixed with more Western styling, a physical representation of the two worlds this marriage was meant to bridge. You look beautiful, Naomi said softly. Truly. Clara couldn't see it. All she saw was a young woman playing dress-up in someone else's life. Naomi, Clara said carefully. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did Thomas Amarok, Nathaniel's father, why did he insist on this? He could have just forgiven the debt. Or taken payments over time. Why force a marriage? Naomi's hand stilled on the fabric. She was quiet for so long that Clara thought she wouldn't answer. Then she sighed and moved to sit on the nearby chair. Thomas was a complicated man. Traditional in some ways, progressive in others. He believed strongly in maintaining connections between the old families and the newer settlers in Denali Ridge. He saw too much division, too much separation. She paused. Your father, Samuel, he and Thomas were friends once. Did you know that? Clara shook her head, stunned. When they were young men, before either of them married, they worked together on a fishing crew. They were close. But when Samuel married your mother, a black woman from the lower 48, some in the community disapproved. Thomas's family especially. They said Samuel was betraying his obligations, choosing outsiders over his own kind. But Samuel wasn't Athabaskan, Clara said, confused. No, but he was Denali Ridge born and raised. That used to mean something. The old families expected him to marry a local, someone they knew. Your mother was an outsider, and worse, Naomi hesitated. And worse, she was black, Clara finished bitterly. In a town that's mostly white and Athabaskan. Yes. Naomi didn't flinch from the truth. Thomas defended Samuel's choice. He and his family had a falling out over it. By the time Thomas's father died and Thomas took over the business, the friendship had faded. But I think Thomas always regretted that. The division. The lost connection. So this marriage is what? Some kind of redemption. I think, Naomi said carefully, Thomas saw a chance to build a bridge that should have been built a generation ago. To unite families that should have been united through friendship if not marriage. To show that the old divisions don't have to continue. That's a pretty story, Clara said. But it still makes me a pawn in someone else's narrative. Yes, Naomi agreed. It does. And I'm sorry for that. But perhaps you can make it into something more. Perhaps you can be the one who writes the next chapter of the story, not just a character in someone else's tale. Before Clara could respond, there was a knock at the door. One of the household staff entered with a message. Miss Thompson, there's someone here to see you. A woman from town. She says it's urgent. Clara exchanged glances with Naomi, then followed the staff member downstairs. In the front room, she found Anna Chen, the post office worker, pacing nervously. Anna? What's wrong? Anna rushed over, gripping Clara's hands. I shouldn't be here. I know you have a million things to do before tomorrow, but I had to tell you. There's talk in town. Some of the men, they're planning something. Clara's stomach dropped. Planning what? A protest. Or maybe more than a protest. Tommy Miller and some others, they're saying this wedding is wrong. That you're being forced into slavery. They want to stop it. Oh God. Clara sank into a chair. When? Tomorrow. During the ceremony. They're talking about disrupting it, maybe even trying to. I don't know, Clara. Tommy's been drinking, saying crazy things about rescuing you whether you want it or not. Naomi appeared in the doorway, her face grave. She'd obviously been listening. How many men? She asked Anna. Maybe a dozen? But they're worked up. They really believe they're doing the right thing. Clara looked between the two women, her mind racing. Tommy Miller was a fool, but he wasn't malicious. If he and his friends tried something during the wedding, people could get hurt. And it would make everything so much worse. I have to talk to them, Clara said, standing. I have to make them understand. It's too late, Naomi said. The wedding is tomorrow at 2. If you go into town now, you'll just make things more volatile. Then what do I do? Clara felt panic rising in her chest. Let them ruin the wedding? Let them get themselves arrested or worse trying to save me from a marriage I've already agreed to. I'll tell Nathaniel, Naomi said grimly. He'll handle it. No. The word came out sharp and firm. Clara surprised herself with her own certainty. No, this is my mess to handle. My town, my friends or former friends who think they're helping. I'll deal with it. She turned to Anna. Can you get a message to Tommy? Tell him I want to meet him at the diner tonight. 7 o'clock. Just him, no one else. Anna nodded quickly. I can do that. After Anna left, Naomi studied Clara with new interest. You're sure about this? No, Clara admitted. But I'm sure that if I let other people keep making decisions for me, I'll never feel like my life belongs to me again. This marriage might be forced, but how I handle it, that's mine to choose. Naomi's smile was approving. You're going to be good for this family, Clara Thompson. Better than any of us realized. Clara hoped she was right. Because tomorrow, for better or worse, she would become Clara Amarok. And she needed to believe there was some power in that name, some agency in that new identity. Even if she'd been given no choice in taking it. The Denali Ridge diner was nearly empty when Clara arrived at 6:50. Mrs. Blackwood was wiping down tables, preparing to close early. She looked up when Clara entered, her expression softening with something like sympathy. Heard you wanted to meet Tommy here. I'll give you two some privacy. She hung up her apron. Coffee's fresh if you want it. Lock up when you're done, just flip the sign. Clara nodded her thanks and poured herself a cup with shaking hands. She'd changed out of the wedding dress back into her regular clothes, jeans, and a sweater that had belonged to her father, but she still felt exposed, vulnerable. Outside the windows, darkness had already fallen, and snow was beginning to drift down in lazy spirals. Tommy Miller arrived at 7 on the dot. He was a big man who had been a star linebacker in high school before a knee injury ended any college prospects, with sandy brown hair and a face that was usually quick to smile. Tonight, he looked stormy, his jaw set and his eyes red-rimmed. Clara. He sat down heavily across from her. Anna said you wanted to talk. I heard about your plan. About tomorrow. Tommy had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but he didn't deny it. We can't just let this happen. You're being sold like livestock, Clara. This is Alaska, not some third world country. Women have rights here. I know what my rights are, Tommy. Then why aren't you fighting this? He leaned forward, his voice rising. You could refuse. You could go to the police, to a lawyer. Hell, you could just leave. I'd drive you to Anchorage tonight if you wanted. I'd help you start over somewhere else. Clara took a sip of coffee, buying herself time to organize her thoughts. And what happens to my grandmother when I leave? They take her house. She ends up in some state facility or freezing on the street. Is that what you want? We could protect her. The town could. The town can barely protect itself, Clara cut him off. Half the businesses here are barely hanging on. Nobody has the money or resources to stand up to the Amaroks, and you know it. Tommy's fists clenched on the table. So you're just giving up? Just accepting this? I'm accepting reality. Clara set down her cup carefully. Tommy, I know you think you're helping. I know you and your friends have convinced yourselves that disrupting the wedding is some noble act. But all you're going to do is make things worse. How could they be worse than you being forced to marry a man you don't love? Clara almost laughed at the irony. You mean like how you've been asking me out for years even though I've made it clear I'm not interested? Like how you've never accepted that I don't want to date you? Tommy flinched. That's different. Is it? You've been trying to force a relationship between us for years. At least Nathaniel Amarok has the excuse of legal obligation. What's yours? I care about you, Tommy said, his voice dropping. I've always cared about you. I know. And I appreciate that, truly. But caring about someone doesn't give you the right to make decisions for them. Even if you think you're protecting them. Clara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. I need you to call off whatever you and your friends are planning. Not because I'm afraid of what the Amaroks will do, though I am, but because I'm asking you to respect my choice. But it's not a choice, Tommy protested. Not a real one. Maybe not. But it's the only one I have, and I've made my peace with it. Or at least, I'm trying to. She squeezed his hand. Please, Tommy. If you really care about me, let me do this my way. Let me handle my own life. Tommy was quiet for a long time, staring at their joined hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. I just wanted to save you. I know. But I don't need saving. I need support. I need my friends to accept what's happening and help me through it, not try to stop it and make everything worse. What if he hurts you? Tommy's voice cracked. What if he's cruel or? Then I'll deal with it. But Tommy, I've talked to him. He's not a monster. He's just a man trapped by the same obligations that are trapping me. We're both prisoners of our father's choices. Tommy pulled his hand away and scrubbed it across his face. I don't like this. Any of it. Neither do I. But life doesn't always give us what we like. They sat in heavy silence for several minutes. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, coating the street in white. Clara thought about how many times she'd sat in this diner with Tommy and her other high school friends, laughing over milkshakes and French fries, believing the future was wide open and full of possibility. How young they'd all been. How naive. Okay, Tommy finally said. I'll call it off. I'll tell the others to stand down. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely she felt dizzy. Thank you. But Clara? Tommy met her eyes. If things go bad. If you need help, any kind of help, you call me. Day or night. I mean it. I will. I promise. After Tommy left, Clara sat alone in the diner for a while longer, watching the snow fall and trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. In less than 24 hours, she'd be married. She'd be living at the Amarok estate, sleeping in a stranger's house, navigating a culture and family she barely understood. The weight of it threatened to crush her. But then she thought about what Naomi had said, perhaps you can be the one who writes the next chapter of the story. And she thought about Nathaniel's promise that he wouldn't touch her, that he'd support her dreams, that he was trying, in his limited way, to make this bearable. It wasn't love. It wasn't even really a choice. But maybe, just maybe, it could be something she could survive. Something she could shape into a life worth living. She locked up the diner and walked home through the snow, feeling oddly calm for the first time since the letter had arrived. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. All she could do was face it with as much dignity and strength as she could muster. The morning of December 1st dawned cold and crystalline, the sun rising late over Denali Ridge like it was reluctant to witness what was about to happen. Clara woke at dawn, unable to sleep any longer, and found her grandmother already up and making breakfast. Figured you wouldn't want much, Ruby said, setting down a plate of toast and eggs. But you should eat something. It's going to be a long day. Clara picked at the food, her stomach in knots. She'd laid out her clothes for the ceremony with simple undergarments, the slip Naomi had provided, but the wedding dress itself was at the Amarok estate. She'd get ready there, surrounded by Nathaniel's family and the women who'd help her prepare. You look like your mama, Ruby said suddenly. The morning of her wedding. She had that same look, scared but determined. Like she was about to walk into a storm but refused to let it blow her down. Was she happy? Clara asked. With Daddy, I mean. Despite everything, the debt, the illness, all of it. Was she happy? Ruby smiled, her eyes distant with memory. She was. Your daddy loved her something fierce. And she loved him right back. They had 12 good years together before the cancer came. That's more than a lot of people get. She reached across to cup Clara's cheek. I'm not saying this marriage will be like that. But maybe it could be. If you give it a chance. I don't know if I have any chances left to give. Baby, you have more strength in you than you realize. You're Samuel Thompson's daughter and Ruby Mae Henderson's grandbaby. We come from people who survived slavery, who survived Jim Crow, who survived being the only black family in a white town in the middle of Alaska. You come from survivors. Don't forget that." Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "I'm scared, Grandma." "I know, baby. I know." Ruby pulled her into a tight embrace. "But you're not alone. You'll never be alone. I'm here." And maybe she pulled back to look Clara in the eye. Maybe Nathaniel Amarok will surprise you. Maybe he'll be more than you're expecting. At noon, a car arrived to take Clara to the Amarok estate. She kissed her grandmother goodbye, holding on perhaps a moment too long, and climbed into the back seat. The driver, a young Athabaskan man Clara didn't recognize, said nothing during the drive, leaving her alone with her spiraling thoughts. The estate was transformed. What had been a quiet, almost austere compound was now decorated with white flowers and ribbons, evergreen boughs, and traditional Athabaskan symbols Clara was just beginning to recognize. Cars lined the long driveway. Apparently, this wasn't going to be a small, quiet affair. Naomi met her at the door, her face warm but serious. "Come. The women are waiting to help you prepare." Clara followed her to a large bedroom she'd never seen before, not the room Naomi had shown her as her future quarters, but something else. A ceremonial space, she realized. The walls were draped in traditional blankets, and a group of Athabaskan women of various ages sat waiting, their faces carefully neutral. "This is Clara," Naomi announced. "Today she joins our family." The oldest woman, her face lined with age and her hair pure white, stood and approached Clara. She studied her with sharp dark eyes, and Clara had to fight the urge to look away. "You have strength," the old woman finally said in heavily accented English. "Good. You will need it." She gestured to the other women. "We will prepare you. Teach you. Help you understand what it means to be Amarok." What followed was surreal. The women bathed her in water scented with herbs, their hands gentle but thorough. They rubbed her skin with oils and sang songs in a language Clara didn't understand but that somehow felt ancient, powerful. They braided her hair in an intricate pattern, weaving in small beads and what looked like carved bone. Through it all, they told her stories. About Nathaniel's mother, who had died when he was 12. About his grandmother, a fierce woman who had fought to preserve Athabaskan traditions when the government tried to stamp them out. About the Amarok family line, stretching back centuries to a time before white settlers had ever seen Alaska. "You are not just marrying Nathaniel," the old woman said as she fastened the ancestral necklace around Clara's throat. "You are marrying all of us. All our history. All our hopes for the future." The weight of the necklace, both physical and metaphorical, pressed down on Clara's chest. Finally, they brought out the dress. Up close, it was even more beautiful than Clara remembered. The women helped her into it, adjusting every fold and seam with practiced hands. When they were done, they turned her to face a full-length mirror. Clara barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror was elegant, almost regal. The dress flattered her figure without being revealing. The beadwork in her hair caught the light. The necklace marked her as something more than she'd been that morning. She looked like a bride. More than that, she looked like an Amarok bride. "Beautiful," Naomi whispered. "Truly beautiful." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. One of the younger women answered it, then turned back to the group. "It's time." Clara's heart began to race. This was it. No more preparing, no more waiting. In minutes, she'd be walking down whatever aisle they'd created, toward a man she barely knew, into a life she'd never chosen. The women formed a processional around her, guiding her through the house and out into the cold December afternoon. They'd set up the ceremony outdoors, she realized traditional Athabaskan custom. A large circle had been cleared in the snow, surrounded by standing torches that flickered in the wind. Chairs held what looked like 100 guests, all dressed in their finest, all turning to watch as Clara appeared. And at the center of the circle, waiting beside an elder in traditional dress, stood Nathaniel Amarok. He wore a mixture of Western and Athabaskan clothing, dark pants and a white shirt, but over it a traditional tunic decorated with intricate beadwork. His hair was loose for the first time Clara had seen, falling past his shoulders. He looked different. Powerful. Like he belonged to this moment in a way Clara wasn't sure she ever would. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. Not love, it was too soon for that. But recognition. Acknowledgement. Two people about to bind their lives together, for better or worse, because honor and obligation demanded it. The woman guided Clara forward, and she began the longest walk of her life. What would you do if you were in Clara's position to walk toward a forced marriage with dignity, or find a way to run at the last moment? Let me know in the comments. Each step through the snow felt like walking through water. Clara's breath came in short white clouds, her hands trembling despite the warmth of the furred cloak the women had draped over her shoulders. The faces in the crowd blurred, some sympathetic, some curious, some carefully blank. She spotted her grandmother in the front row, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Beside Ruby sat Tommy Miller and his family, his jaw tight but his eyes full of respect for the promise he'd kept. The elder conducting the ceremony was a man of perhaps 70, his face carved with lines that spoke of hard winters and harder choices. He wore traditional clothing, all of it, and held a staff topped with carved ivory. When Clara reached the circle, he raised one hand. "We gather in the old way," he said, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. "When the earth sleeps under snow, when the spirits walk close. We gather to witness the joining of two families, two hearts, two futures." He looked at Clara. "You come alone." Naomi stepped forward. She comes with her grandmother, Ruby May Henderson, who gives her blessing. She comes with the memory of her father, Samuel Thompson, whose debt we honor. She comes to us in respect and on duty. The elder nodded and turned to Nathaniel. "Are you prepared?" "I do." Nathaniel's voice was steady, but Clara could see tension in his shoulders. "I come to fulfill my father's promise, to honor the old ways, to welcome this woman into my family and my life." Then we begin. What followed was unlike any ceremony Clara had ever witnessed. The elder spoke in Athabaskan long passages that the assembled crowd seemed to understand, but that washed over Clara like music in an unknown key. Nathaniel responded at intervals, his pronunciation fluid and natural. This was his world, Clara realized. His language, his traditions, his belonging. And she was the outsider being grafted onto his tree. Then the elder switched to English. "Marriage is not only love," he said, his eyes moving between Clara and Nathaniel. "Sometimes it is duty. Sometimes it is survival. Sometimes it is the price we pay for honor." He paused, letting the words settle. But what begins in obligation can grow into something more. Seeds planted in hard ground still bloom. He produced a length of woven cord, dark blue and white, and gestured for Clara and Nathaniel to extend their hands. As the elder wrapped the cord around their wrists, binding them together, Clara felt the full weight of what was happening crash over her. This was real. This was permanent. "What joins here cannot be easily broken," the elder intoned. "The cord represents the ties of family, of promise, of shared future. Do you, Nathaniel Amarok, accept this binding?" "I do." Nathaniel's eyes never left Clara's face. "Do you, Clara Thompson, accept this binding?" Clara's mouth was dry. Every cell in her body screamed to run, to tear the cord away, to sprint back to her grandmother's cabin and barricade the door. But Ruby's words echoed in her mind, "You come from survivors." "I do." Her voice was barely a whisper. The elder continued the ceremony, weaving between Athabaskan and English, traditional and modern. There were prayers to spirits Clara didn't know, references to ancestors whose names were unfamiliar. But there were also elements she recognized: the exchange of rings, simple gold bands that felt heavy on her finger. The declaration of marriage. The pronouncement that what had been two was now one. "You may honor your bride," the elder finally said. Clara understood what was expected. Nathaniel was supposed to kiss her, sealing the marriage in front of all these witnesses. She braced herself, trying not to flinch. But Nathaniel surprised her. Instead of kissing her lips, he bent forward and pressed his forehead to hers, his hands coming up to gently frame her face. It was intimate without being invasive, traditional without being presumptuous. His skin was warm against hers, and she could smell cedar and wood smoke on him. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. "I know what this cost you." Then he pulled back and turned to face the crowd. "It is done," he announced. The assembled guests erupted in applause and cheers, some genuine, Clara suspected, and some merely polite. The elder unwound the cord from their wrists and handed it to Nathaniel, who folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. "Now we feast," Naomi announced, appearing at Clara's side. "And we give gifts." Clara had forgotten about that part. Of course there would be gifts if this was a wedding, even if it felt more like a business transaction. As the guests began moving toward a large structure Clara hadn't noticed before, some kind of temporary pavilion erected for the reception, she felt Nathaniel's hand at the small of her back, guiding her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "No," Clara answered honestly. "But I'm standing." "That's something." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's more than something. That's everything." The pavilion was warm, heated by multiple stoves and the press of bodies. Long tables had been set up, laden with food, both traditional Athabaskan dishes Clara didn't recognize and more familiar fare. The scent of roasted salmon mixed with freshly baked bread and something sweet and spiced. Clara and Nathaniel were seated at a head table, elevated slightly above the others. Ruby was placed beside Clara and Naomi beside Nathaniel. As people settled into their seats and servers began bringing food, Clara felt herself beginning to fragment. She was here, in this moment, married to this man. But part of her was also floating above, watching it all happen to someone else. "You need to eat," Ruby whispered, nudging a plate toward her. "Just a little bit. Keep your strength up." Clara forced down some bread and a few bites of salmon, though it all tasted like ash in her mouth. Around them, the celebration grew louder, with people talking, laughing, toasting the newlyweds with raised glasses. It felt obscene, all this joy at something that had been forced. Then the gifts began. The Athabaskan tradition, Naomi had explained, was for the groom's family to present gifts to the bride as a welcome into the family. Clara had expected something modest, perhaps some jewelry, maybe kitchen items for the home she'd now share with Nathaniel. The first gift came from the elder who'd performed the ceremony. He presented Clara with a beautiful knife in a beaded sheath. "For protection," he said. "And for survival. May you never need it, but may it always be ready if you do." Clara accepted it with shaking hands, not sure if the gift was thoughtful or threatening. More gifts followed. Woven blankets from Nathaniel's aunts. A set of books on Athabaskan herbalism from one of the older women who'd helped her dress. A carved cedar box filled with letters from Nathaniel's mother to his father, Naomi explained quietly, preserved as a reminder that love can grow even in arranged marriages. Each gift was meaningful, clearly chosen with care. But none of them felt like they were truly for Clara. They felt like they were for the role she was now supposed to play. Then Nathaniel stood, and the room fell silent. "I have a gift for my wife," he announced, his voice carrying across the pavilion. He gestured to someone at the back of the room, and two men came forward carrying a large rectangular object covered in cloth. They set it down in front of the head table, and Nathaniel moved to stand beside it. "Clara," he said, looking directly at her. "I know this marriage is not what you wanted. I know I can never give you back the future you planned, the freedom you deserved. But I can give you this." He pulled away the cloth. Underneath was a painting, no, not just a painting. An entire framed display. The central piece was a portrait of a young black woman who looked so much like Clara it was startling. She wore simple clothes from perhaps 30 years ago and smiled at the camera with joy and confidence. "Your mother," Nathaniel said softly. Rebecca Thompson, before illness, took her smile. I found this photo in your father's belongings, the items that were sold at auction to partially pay the debt. I had it restored and painted by an artist in Anchorage. But that wasn't all. Surrounding the portrait were other images of Samuel Thompson as a young man, strong and laughing. Ruby as a younger woman, fierce and beautiful. And in the center, a new photograph that hadn't existed before, Clara herself, digitally added to stand between her parents, the family complete in a way it had never actually been. Clara couldn't breathe. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. But that's not the gift, Nathaniel continued. Not the real one. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and opened it, removing several official-looking documents. This is the deed to your grandmother's cabin. Paid in full, in your name. She'll never have to worry about losing it. He set down the first document and picked up another. This is a full scholarship to the University of Alaska Fairbanks nursing program, starting next fall if you want it. Tuition, books, housing are all covered. The room was utterly silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. And this, Nathaniel held up a final document, his hand trembling slightly, is a legal agreement. It states that while we are legally married, you have the right to pursue divorce at any time, for any reason, with no penalty. The debt is considered settled regardless. Your grandmother's house stays in your name. The scholarship remains yours. And you'll receive a settlement of $100,000 to start your new life. Clara's vision swam. She gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. I can't undo what my father's promise did to you, Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't give you back your choice. But I can give you a future. A real one. One where you're not trapped by my family's honor or your father's debt. You can stay, and we can try to build something together. Or you can go, and I'll never blame you for it. The real choice is finally yours. The room erupted. People were gasping, exclaiming, turning to their neighbors in shock. The Amaroks looked stunned, and clearly Nathaniel hadn't told even his own family what he was planning. Ruby was sobbing openly, her hands pressed to her mouth. But Clara couldn't look at any of them. She could only stare at Nathaniel, at this man who had just given her the one thing she'd thought was lost forever. Her freedom. Why? The word came out broken. Why would you do this? Nathaniel knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. Because my father was wrong. Honor isn't worth more than someone's freedom. Tradition isn't worth more than someone's happiness. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. I couldn't stop the wedding. I made a promise to my father. But I can make sure you're never truly trapped by it. Clara looked at the documents, at the painting of her family, at the room full of shocked witnesses. She thought about the cabin, secure forever in her name. About nursing school, her dreams suddenly became possible. About the divorce papers, her escape route was signed and sealed. She thought about running. She could leave right now, this very moment, and never look back. But she also thought about the man kneeling before her, who had just surrendered every advantage, every leverage, to give her a choice. Who had honored his father's dying wish while also honoring her humanity. Who had seen her not as property or obligation, but as a person deserving of agency. Clara stood on shaking legs. The room held its breath. She took Nathaniel's face in her hands, much as he had done during the ceremony. "Ask me again," she whispered. "Ask me to marry you. Not because you have to. Not because of debt or honor or promises. Just ask me." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Clara Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite the tears now streaming down his face. "Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on building something real, something chosen, out of this forced beginning?" Clara smiled through her tears. "Ask me again in a year. When I've had time to know you, to choose you freely." She pressed her forehead to his. "But for now, for tonight, I'll stay. Not because I'm trapped. But because I want to see what happens when two prisoners of obligation choose to make something beautiful anyway." The room exploded with applause, with cheers, with the sound of 100 people witnessing something they hadn't expected, not just a forced marriage, but the possibility of love growing from impossible ground. As Nathaniel stood and pulled Clara into a gentle embrace, she felt something shift in her chest. She was still scared. Still uncertain. Still grieving the future she'd lost. But she was also, for the first time since the letter had arrived, genuinely curious about the future she might find. And that, she realized, was its own kind of freedom. The celebration continued long into the night, but Clara experienced it as if through a veil. People came to congratulate her, to exclaim over Nathaniel's gift, to whisper about how romantic it all was. She smiled and nodded and said the right things, but inside she was reeling. Everything had changed in a single moment. The marriage she dreaded, the trap she'd resigned herself to Nathaniel had transformed it into something else entirely. Not a cage, but a door. One she could walk through whenever she chose. The question was, would she? As the evening wore on, guests began to depart, bundling into their coats and trucks, heading back to their homes in Denali Ridge and beyond. Ruby hugged Clara so tightly she could barely breathe. "That man," Ruby whispered, nodding toward Nathaniel who was saying goodbye to the elder. "He's got a good heart, baby. Whatever you decide, remember that." "I will, Grandma. Are you coming home tonight?" Ruby's voice was hesitant. "Or?" Clara glanced at Nathaniel, then back at her grandmother. "I should stay. Not because I have to, but because I think we need to talk. Really talk." Ruby nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You call me if you need anything." Anything at all. After Ruby left with Anna Chen, who'd offered to drive her home, the estate grew quiet. The staff cleaned up efficiently, and the Amarok family members who lived on the property retreated to their own quarters. Finally, only Clara and Nathaniel remained in the pavilion, surrounded by the remnants of the feast. "Would you like to see your room?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "The one I mentioned." "Your space." Clara nodded, suddenly exhausted. Nathaniel led her back to the main house and up a flight of stairs she'd never climbed before. He stopped at a door at the end of a long hallway and opened it. The room beyond was beautiful. Large windows overlooked the forest, though now they showed only darkness and falling snow. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace. The bed was huge, covered in the softest-looking blankets Clara had ever seen. There was a desk, bookshelves already filled with books, a comfortable reading chair by the fire. And on the dresser, someone had placed the painting Nathaniel had given her. "This is yours," Nathaniel said. "Private. The door locks from the inside. I'm down the hall, fourth door on the left if you need anything. But I won't disturb you unless you ask." Clara walked into the room slowly, running her hand along the desk, the chair, and the books. Someone had brought her meager belongings from the cabin. Her clothes hung in the closet, her few personal items arranged carefully on the shelves. "Nathaniel." She turned to face him. "Why did you really do it? The gift, the freedom. You had me. The marriage was legal. You could have kept everything exactly as it was." He leaned against the doorframe, and for the first time all day, she saw him let his guard down completely. He looked exhausted, older than his years. "Because I've been thinking about what my father wanted. Really wanted." He ran a hand through his hair. "He said he wanted to build a bridge between families, between cultures. But you can't build a bridge by force. You can't create connections through coercion. All you create is resentment and pain. So you freed me. I tried to give you what you should have had from the beginning. A choice." He met her eyes. "My father was a good man in many ways, but this plan and this arrangement was wrong. I see that now. I think maybe I always saw it, but I was too bound by obligation to admit it." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her all at once. "I don't know what to do now. I don't know how I feel." "You don't have to know. Not tonight." Nathaniel straightened. "Rest. process. Tomorrow, we can talk about what comes next. But tonight, just rest. He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. Clara? Thank you for staying. Even just for tonight. It means more than you know. After he left, Clara sat in silence for a long time, staring at the painting of her family. Her parents, young and in love. Her grandmother, strong and steady. And herself, inserted into a moment that had never existed but somehow felt more real than anything else that day. She thought about the divorce papers, safely filed away somewhere. Her escape route, guaranteed and legal. She could wait a few weeks, a few months, then leave with money and scholarship and future intact. No one would blame her. Even Nathaniel had made it clear he expected nothing more. But something stopped her from immediately planning her departure. Something about the way Nathaniel had trembled when he'd handed her those documents. The way his voice had broken when he'd said honor wasn't worth more than freedom. The way he'd transformed a forced marriage into an act of liberation. Clara stood and moved to the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white. A blank slate. A fresh start. Maybe, she thought, maybe there was something here worth exploring. Not an obligation. Not debt. But possibility. She wouldn't decide tonight. But she won't run tomorrow either. For now, that was enough. Clara woke to weak winter sunlight filtering through the windows. For a disoriented moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: the wedding, the gift, Nathaniel's impossible gesture of freedom. She was married. And somehow, impossibly, that fact felt less terrifying than it had yesterday. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. Yes? It's Naomi. May I come in? Clara pulled on a robe she'd found hanging in the closet and opened the door. Naomi entered carrying a tray with breakfast eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and coffee that smelled like heaven. I thought you might want to eat before facing everyone, Naomi said, setting the tray on the desk. The family is curious, as you can imagine. Nathaniel's gift was unexpected. For me too. Clara poured herself coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Was everyone angry? That he gave away so much? Naomi settled into the reading chair. Surprised, mostly. Some of the elders were disapproving. They think Nathaniel showed weakness, undermining the whole purpose of the arrangement. But others? She smiled. Others think he showed wisdom. That he found a way to honor his father's wish while also correcting his father's mistake. What do you think? I think, Naomi said carefully, that my nephew has been carrying a heavy burden since his father died. Trying to be the perfect son, the perfect leader, the perfect keeper of tradition. Last night, I saw him finally put some of that burden down. Saw him choose his own conscience over obligation. She met Clara's eyes. I think that took more courage than simply following through with the forced marriage would have. Clara sipped her coffee, processing that. He said I could leave whenever I want. That the choice is mine. And is it? The choice you want, I mean to leave. Clara was quiet for a long moment. I don't know yet. Yesterday I would have said yes without hesitation. But now... She gestured helplessly. Now I'm confused. He gave me everything I thought I wanted, and instead of running, I'm sitting here wondering what happens if I stay. What would you need? Naomi asked. To feel comfortable staying, at least for a while. Time, Clara said immediately. Time to know him as a person, not just as the man I was forced to marry. Time to figure out if this could ever be real or if we're just play acting at marriage. That seems reasonable. Naomi stood. Take all the time you need. Nathaniel is patient. And despite what happened yesterday, he's still bound by his promise to his father. He won't seek divorce, won't push you away. The move has to be yours. After Naomi left, Clara ate slowly, thinking. She needed a plan. Not an escape plan, she had that already, signed and sealed. but a living plan. A way to navigate this strange new reality. She showered and dressed in her own clothes, jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy. Then she set out to explore the house that was apparently now her home. The Amarok estate was larger than she'd realized. Besides the main house, there were several outbuildings, workshops, storage, and what looked like a small office. She found Nathaniel in one of the workshops, working on what appeared to be a fishing boat motor. He was wearing work clothes again, his hands covered in grease, completely absorbed in his task. Clara watched him for a moment from the doorway. There was something peaceful about the way he worked, methodically, carefully, completely focused. This was who he was when no one was watching, she realized. Not the stoic heir or the reluctant groom. Just a man who liked working with his hands. "How long have you been standing there?" Nathaniel asked without looking up. Clara startled. "How did you know I was here?" "Saw your reflection in the window." He wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face her. "Did you sleep all right?" "Better than I expected." Clara stepped into the workshop, looking around at the tools and equipment. "Is this what you do? Fix things?" "When I can. Running the business keeps me in offices and on docks most of the time, but I like being hands-on when possible." He gestured at the motor. "This is from one of our smaller boats. The engine seized up last week. Could pay someone to fix it, but I like figuring out the problems myself." "Nathaniel." Clara crossed her arms, gathering courage. "I want to understand something. You said you'd been seeing someone before all this. That she left when she realized you'd go through with the marriage." His expression shuttered slightly. "Yes." "Did you love her?" "I thought I might. Eventually." He set down the rag. "Her name is Catherine. We'd been seeing each other for about a year. It wasn't serious yet, but it could have been. When my father died, I told her about the promise, about the debt and the arranged marriage. She said she understood. But when it became clear I wouldn't back out, that I'd actually marry you, she said she couldn't be with someone who'd treat another person that way. She was right." "I know." Nathaniel's voice was heavy. "She called me a coward. Said I was hiding behind honor and duty to avoid making hard choices. Said if I really believed in doing the right thing, I'd refuse the arrangement and find another way to settle the debt." Clara moved closer. "Why didn't you?" "Because I'm not as brave as you think I am." He met her eyes. "I told myself I was honoring my father, preserving tradition. But really, I was afraid. Afraid of what refusing would mean, disappointing my family, breaking with tradition, maybe losing the respect of the community. It felt easier to go through with it than to stand up and say no. But then you gave me the gift. The divorce papers, the freedom. Catherine was right about one thing, I was a coward. But I didn't have to stay one." He leaned against the workbench. "I couldn't stop the wedding without breaking my promise to my father. But I could make sure that whatever happened after wasn't built on coercion. That was the least I could do." Clara studied him, his complicated man who'd trapped her and freed her in almost the same breath. "I don't hate you," she said quietly. "I should, maybe. But I don't." "You probably should," Nathaniel agreed. "I need things from you," Clara continued. "If I'm going to stay here, even temporarily, I need boundaries. Rules. Things we both agree to. Name them. First, we're honest with each other. No more secrets, no more obligations you haven't told me about. If something affects both of us, I need to know." Agreed. Second, we're roommates, not spouses. Not yet, maybe not ever. You have your space, I have mine. We eat together if we want, but there's no obligation to act like a couple in private. Of course. Third, I want to work. Not at your company, somewhere neutral. The general store is fine for now, but eventually I want to plan for nursing school. I need my own money, my own purpose outside of being Mrs. Amarok. Nathaniel nodded. Anything else? Clara took a deep breath. Teach me. About your culture, your traditions, your language. If I'm going to be here, even for a little while, I want to understand. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Would that be all right? For the first time since she'd met him, Nathaniel smiled really, wide and genuine. I'd like that. Very much. Okay then. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. We'll try this. Day by day. No promises about the future, but no running away either. We'll just see what happens. Day by day, Nathaniel agreed. That's all anyone can ask. They stood in the workshop, morning light streaming through the windows, the motor sitting half-repaired between them. It wasn't a romantic moment. It wasn't even particularly comfortable. But it was honest. And for now, that was more than Clara had dared to hope for. The first week of marriage was nothing like Clara had imagined, mostly because she'd imagined something either romantic or horrifying, and it turned out to be neither. It was simply awkward. Two strangers learning to share space, to navigate each other's rhythms, to build something that resembled a life together. Nathaniel left for work early each morning, usually before Clara woke. He'd leave coffee made and something simple for breakfast, laid out toast, fruit, once a note saying the eggs were in the fridge if she wanted them. Small gestures that said, "I'm thinking of you," without demanding anything in return. Clara spent her days reading the books Nathaniel had given her, learning about Athabaskan history and customs. She helped Naomi around the estate, learning to prepare traditional foods, understanding the significance of different patterns in weaving and beadwork. And she went back to work at the general store, despite protests from both Nathaniel and Ruby that she didn't need to. "I need normal," Clara had insisted. "I need something in my life that's still mine." The town's reaction to her marriage was mixed. Some people treated her with new deference. She was an Amarok now, after all, part of the most powerful family in the region. Others looked at her with pity, still seeing her as the girl who'd been sold to settle a debt. And a few, like Tommy Miller, seemed to be waiting for her to admit it had all been a terrible mistake. "You look good," Tommy said one afternoon when he came into the store. "Happy, even." "I wasn't expecting that." Clara restocked candy bars, not meeting his eyes. "I'm figuring it out. Day by day." "He is treating you right?" "Nathaniel?" "Yes." And it was true. Nathaniel was unfailingly respectful, careful to honor the boundaries Clara had set. They ate dinner together most evenings, conversations gradually moving from stilted small talk to genuine exchanges. He told her about his work, the challenges of running a fishing operation in an industry that was rapidly changing. She told him about her dreams of nursing school, her fear that she'd forgotten too much from her high school science classes. "You could start studying now," Nathaniel had suggested. "Get back into it before the fall semester." "I could help because I was always good at science." So they'd started spending evenings in the library, books spread between them, Nathaniel patiently explaining cellular biology and chemistry basics. Clara found herself looking forward to these sessions, not just for the learning but for the quiet companionship. The way Nathaniel's face lit up when she grasped a difficult concept. The sound of his rare laughter when she made a joke about mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell. It wasn't romance. But it was becoming something like friendship. 2 weeks after the wedding, Clara woke to find Nathaniel already gone, but a note on the kitchen table, "Gone to Fairbanks for business. Back tomorrow night. Call if you need anything." The house felt empty without him, Clara realized with surprise. She'd grown accustomed to the sounds of him moving through space, the creak of his footsteps on the stairs, the low rumble of his voice when he talked on the phone, the splash of water when he washed dishes after dinner. She spent the day restlessly, unable to settle into any task. By evening, she found herself in Nathaniel's workshop, looking at the boat motor he'd been fixing. He'd gotten it working, she noticed. The parts were reassembled, tools put away neatly. Ready for the boat to return to service. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth metal, thinking about Nathaniel's hands doing the same. thinking about how he'd looked that first morning she'd found him here, peaceful, absorbed, free from the weight of obligation. "You miss him?" Clara spun to find Naomi standing in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. "I was just—" Clara started, then stopped. "Yes. I do." "Is that strange?" "Not at all." Naomi entered the workshop, picking up one of Nathaniel's tools and examining it. "That's how it starts, you know. Not with grand passion or overwhelming attraction. Just with missing someone when they're gone. Wanting to share your day with them. Wondering what they're thinking. We're friends," Clara said carefully. "That's all. For now." Naomi set down the tool. "Clara, I want to tell you something about Nathaniel. Something he probably won't tell you himself." Clara waited. When his mother died, he was 12 years old. His father Thomas he shut down. Couldn't handle the grief, couldn't cope with having a young boy who needed him. So Nathaniel learned to need nothing. He learned to be self-sufficient, to never ask for help, to carry every burden alone. Naomi's eyes were sad. He's been alone, emotionally, for most of his life. Even with Catherine, even with us, his family who loves him, he keeps himself apart. Protected. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see him with you, and I see something different. I see him trying to let someone in. It's clumsy and awkward and he doesn't know how, but he's trying." Naomi moved closer. "Don't give up on him, Clara." "Not yet. I think you might be exactly what he needs, just as much as he's becoming what you need." After Naomi left, Clara stayed in the workshop until darkness fell completely. She thought about Nathaniel, lonely, trying so hard to do the right thing, trapped by his own sense of honor. She thought about the gift he'd given her, the freedom he'd offered even though it meant losing any chance they might have had. She thought about the divorce papers, still unfiled, gathering dust somewhere in his office. That night, alone in her room, Clara made a decision. Nathaniel returned late the following evening, looking exhausted. Clara heard him come in, heard him pause outside her door as if considering knocking, then continue to his own room. She waited 20 minutes, then got up and walked down the hall. She knocked softly on his door. "Come in." Nathaniel was sitting on his bed, still in his travel clothes, looking at something in his hands. When Clara entered, he quickly set it aside, but not before she saw what it was: a photograph. Of them, at the wedding. Someone had captured the moment when Nathaniel had pressed his forehead to hers, when he'd thanked her for staying. In the photo, they both looked vulnerable, uncertain, but somehow right together. "Hi," Clara said. "Hi." Nathaniel stood quickly. "Is everything all right? Do you need something?" "Yes, actually." Clara closed the door behind her, gathering her courage. "I need to talk to you." "Really talk?" Concern flickered across his face. "Okay. Do you want to go downstairs, or—" "Here is fine." Clara sat in the chair by his window, and after a moment's hesitation, Nathaniel sat back down on the bed. "I've been thinking. About us, about this arrangement, about what we're doing." Nathaniel's expression became carefully neutral. And I think we're going about this wrong." "What do you mean?" Clara leaned forward. "We're living like roommates. Polite strangers who happen to share a house. We're careful not to want anything from each other, careful not to expect anything. And I understand why we're both trying to protect ourselves from something we didn't choose. But I don't think that's working anymore. At least not for me." Clara took a breath. "I missed you yesterday. When you were gone. I wanted to tell you about something I read, something Naomi said. I wanted to hear about your trip. And I realized that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, I started caring about you." Nathaniel's carefully neutral expression cracked. "Clara, let me finish." She held up a hand. "I'm not saying I love you. I'm not even saying I'm staying permanently. But I am saying that this, she gestured between them, this careful distance we're maintaining, it's not honest anymore. We're not just roommates. We're not just honoring an obligation. We're becoming something else, and I think we need to acknowledge that. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we try. Really try. Not as strangers forced together, but as two people who are already married and might as well see if we can make something good out of it. Clara's heart was racing. I'm suggesting we date each other. Get to know each other as if we had chosen this. No more sleeping in separate corners of the house and pretending we're not curious about each other. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. You're sure? Because Clara, if we do this, if we really try, I don't know if I can go back to the careful distance. I don't know if I can protect myself from. He trailed off. From what? From hoping, he said quietly. I've been so careful not to hope that this could be real. That you could actually choose me, not because you're trapped but because you want to. If I let myself hope and you leave anyway. He looked down at his hands. I'm not sure I'd survive that. Clara stood and crossed to the bed, sitting beside him. Close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I'm not promising forever. I'm not even promising next month. But I am promising to try. Honestly, openly, to see what this could be. She turned to look at him. Can you do that? Can you take that risk? Nathaniel met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. But he nodded. Yes. I can try. Okay then. Clara felt a smile tugging at her lips. So. Nathaniel Amarok. Would you like to take me on a date? A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it completely. I would. Very much. When? Tomorrow? He seemed to be catching her enthusiasm. There's a place I'd like to show you. If you're willing to trust me for an afternoon. I trust you, Clara said, and realized as she said it that it was true. Somewhere in the past few weeks, Nathaniel had earned that trust through small kindnesses and careful respect. Through giving her freedom even when it cost him everything. They sat together for a while longer, talking about his trip to Fairbanks, about Clara's week alone. The conversation was easy, natural, without the careful boundaries they'd been maintaining. And when Clara finally stood to return to her own room, Nathaniel caught her hand. Thank you, he said softly. For this, give us a real chance. Thank you for making it possible, Clara replied. As she walked back to her room, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, excitement. Not fear, not resignation, but genuine curiosity and hope about what tomorrow might bring. She was still scared. Still uncertain. But she was also, for the first time since the letter had arrived, open to the possibility that this forced beginning might lead to a chosen future. And that, she thought as she climbed into bed, was a kind of miracle all its own. The next afternoon, Nathaniel picked Clara up in one of the estate's trucks, not the fancy one used for business, but an old, well-used vehicle that looked like it had seen thousands of miles of Alaska roads. Where are we going? Clara asked as they drove away from the estate. You'll see. Nathaniel's eyes held mischief. It's a surprise. They drove for almost an hour, leaving Denali Ridge behind and heading deeper into the wilderness. The landscape was breathtaking, endless forests of spruce and birch, mountains rising in the distance, the world covered in pristine white snow. Clara found herself relaxing into the journey, watching the scenery pass, occasionally glancing at Nathaniel's profile as he drove. He looked different today. Lighter somehow, as if the conversation last night had lifted some weight from his shoulders. Finally, they turned off the main road onto a barely visible track that wound through the trees. After another 15 minutes of careful driving, they emerged into a clearing. Clara gasped. Before them was a small lake, frozen solid and covered in snow. But that wasn't what took her breath away. Around the lake stood dozens of trees, and from every branch hung traditional Athabaskan prayer ties, strips of colored fabric, each one representing a prayer or wish or memory. They fluttered in the breeze, creating a rustling symphony of color against the white landscape. "This is the place of voices," Nathaniel said softly. "It's sacred to my people. We come here to remember, to pray, to leave our burdens behind." He helped Clara out of the truck and led her to the edge of the lake. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the prayer ties. "Each color means something," Nathaniel explained, pointing to the different strips. "Red for strength, blue for healing, white for peace, yellow for wisdom. When we face something difficult, we come here and tie our prayers to the trees. The wind carries them to the spirits, and we leave feeling lighter." Clara turned slowly, taking it all in. "It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing this with me. There's more." Nathaniel pulled a strip of fabric from his pocket, deep blue. "This is for you. If you want, you can tie a prayer here. For whatever you need. Whatever you're hoping for." Clara took the fabric, feeling its softness between her fingers. "What did you pray for? When did you come here?" "I came the night before our wedding," Nathaniel admitted. "I prayed for courage. For wisdom to do the right thing even when I didn't know what that was. And I prayed that somehow, despite everything, you'd find a way to be happy." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She walked to the nearest tree and carefully tied the blue fabric to a low branch. As she knotted it, she whispered her own prayer for healing, for understanding, for the courage to stay open to possibility. When she turned back, Nathaniel was watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "What?" she asked. "You look like you belong here. In this place. With these trees and these prayers and—" He paused. "With me." Clara walked back to him, her boots crunching in the snow. "I'm starting to think I might." They stood together at the edge of the frozen lake as the prayer ties danced around them, and for the first time since the wedding, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where she chose to stay. Not because she was trapped, but because she wanted to. Where this forced marriage might become something real. Something chosen. Something like love. The weeks that followed their trip to the place of voices marked a shift in the rhythm of Clara and Nathaniel's life together. What had been careful coexistence became something warmer, more intentional. They were dating, Clara supposed, though it was the strangest courtship she could imagine, getting to know someone you were already married to, falling for someone who was already legally yours. Nathaniel began coming home earlier when he could, bringing small gifts, a book he thought she'd like, her favorite coffee from Fairbanks, once a delicate carving of a raven he'd commissioned from a local artist. Clara started cooking meals for them both, experimenting with recipes that blended her grandmother's southern cooking with traditional Athabaskan dishes Naomi taught her. They took walks in the evenings when the darkness wasn't too complete, bundled against the cold, their breath making clouds in the air. Nathaniel told her stories of his childhood, of his mother before the cancer took her, of learning to fish with his father on summer mornings when the light never quite faded. Clara told him about growing up as one of the few black families in Denali Ridge, about the subtle and not so subtle racism she and her parents had faced, about her mother's determination that Clara would have every opportunity despite the obstacles. "She would have liked you," Clara said one evening as they walked through the snowy forest behind the estate. "My mother. She believed in people's capacity to change, to grow. She would have seen what you did, giving me the choice to leave, and she would have respected that." "I wish I could have known her," Nathaniel replied. "Your father too. I'm sorry that my family's debt took so much from you." "They took from your family too," Clara pointed out. "Your father spent 12 years carrying the weight of that loan, knowing he might have to call it in someday. That couldn't have been easy for him either. They were learning to see each other's pain, to hold space for grief and regret without letting it consume them. It was a delicate balance, this building of something new on the foundation of something forced. But slowly, carefully, they were managing it. Christmas came and went quietly. Clara spent Christmas Eve with Ruby at the cabin, cooking her grandmother's traditional meal and laughing over old family stories. Ruby looked better than she had in months, the stress of potential eviction lifted, the security of owning her home outright showing in every line of her face. "You happy, baby?" Ruby asked as they washed dishes together. Clara considered the question carefully. I'm getting there. It's not what I imagined my life would be, but... She smiled. It's not bad. Nathaniel is. He's good, Grandma. Kinder than I expected. Smarter. Funnier, even, once you get past the serious exterior. Are you falling for him? Maybe. Clara dried a plate slowly. Is that crazy? To fall for someone who forced you into marriage? He didn't force you, Ruby corrected gently. Circumstances did. Your father's debt did. Nathaniel just inherited an impossible situation, same as you. And from where I'm sitting, he's handling it better than most men would. On Christmas Day, Clara returned to the Amarok estate to find it transformed. The family had gathered aunts, uncles, cousins, all to celebrate together. Clara was welcomed warmly, no longer the outsider forced upon them but genuinely accepted as one of their own. Naomi pulled her aside after dinner. You're good for him, you know. Nathaniel. I haven't seen him this happy since before his mother died. I'm not sure I'm doing anything special, Clara demurred. You're giving him something he's never had, someone who sees him, really sees him, not as the heir or the businessman or the keeper of tradition. Just like Nathaniel. Naomi squeezed her arm. That's everything. That night, Nathaniel knocked on Clara's door with a small wrapped package. I got you something, he said, suddenly shy. For Christmas. I know we didn't really discuss gifts, but I saw this and thought of you. Clara opened it to find a delicate necklace not as ornate as the traditional Athabaskan piece she'd worn at the wedding, but beautiful in its simplicity. A small pendant in the shape of a bird in flight. It's a raven, Nathaniel explained. In our stories, Raven is a transformer. She changes things, brings light into darkness, makes new possibilities where none existed before. He met Clara's eyes. That's what you've done for me. For us. Clara felt tears threaten. Nathaniel. I know we're taking this slow. I know you're not ready for, he paused, struggling. But I want you to know that I'm all in. However long this takes, whatever you need, I'm here. Committed. Not because of obligation or honor, but because I choose you, Clara. Every day, I choose you. Clara set down the necklace and took his face in her hands. Help me put it on. She turned, lifting her hair, and felt his hands, slightly trembling, fasten the clasp at her nape. His fingers lingered for just a moment on her skin, and Clara felt electricity shoot through her at the contact. When she turned back, they were standing very close. Close enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, and could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Nathaniel, she whispered. Can I kiss you? His breath caught. You never have to ask permission for that. Not anymore. Clara rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his gently at first, tentative. But Nathaniel responded, one hand coming up to cup her cheek, the other settling at her waist. The kiss deepened, and Clara felt everything else fall away. There was only this moment, this man, this feeling of rightness that defied all logic. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly. I know it's too soon, I know we're still figuring this out, but I need you to know. I love you, Clara. Not the idea of you, not the obligation of you. You. The real, complicated, brilliant, beautiful you. Clara's heart felt too big for her chest. She wasn't ready to say it back, not yet, not quite, but she could offer something else. I'm staying, she said. Not just day by day anymore. I'm choosing to stay, to build a life with you. For real. The smile that broke across Nathaniel's face was like sunrise. He pulled her into a tight embrace, and Clara held him just as fiercely, feeling something click into place in her chest. This was home, she realized. Not the house, not the estate, but this. Him. Them. Everything she'd thought she'd lost, her freedom, her future, a choice she'd found again in a way she never expected. By letting go of her anger and opening herself to possibility, she discovered something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A partner. A home. A love that had been forged in the most impossible circumstances and emerged stronger because of it. January brought challenges. The darkness of Alaska winter pressed down like a weight, and the fishing business faced unexpected problems, equipment failures, weather delays, a shipment lost in a storm. Nathaniel was stressed, working long hours, coming home exhausted and short-tempered. Clara saw a different side of him during those weeks, the driven businessman, the perfectionist who couldn't stand to let anything slip. He snapped at her once over something trivial, and the hurt on her face made him immediately apologize. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. He ran his hands through his hair. "Everything feels like it's falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it." "Let me help," Clara offered. "I may not know fishing, but I know organization, I know numbers. Let me look at what you're dealing with." At first, Nathaniel resisted. This was his burden, his responsibility. But Clara insisted, and eventually he gave in. They spent an entire weekend going through the company's records, identifying inefficiencies, finding places where costs could be cut without sacrificing quality or safety. Clara discovered she had a head for business she'd never known existed. She asked questions Nathaniel hadn't considered, pointed out patterns he'd been too close to see. By the time they finished, they developed a plan that could save the company significant money and streamline operations. "You're brilliant," Nathaniel said, staring at the spreadsheets Clara had created. "How did you see all this?" Fresh eyes, Clara shrugged. "And I grew up watching my grandmother make a dollar stretch like it was 5. You learn to spot waste when you've never had anything to waste." The plan worked. Within weeks, the business began stabilizing. Nathaniel's stress lessened, and more importantly, he began consulting Clara on other decisions. She became his sounding board, his advisor, his partner in more than just name. The town noticed the change too. When Clara walked into the general store now, people greeted her with genuine warmth. She wasn't just the girl who'd been forced to marry an Amarok anymore. She was Mrs. Amarok, a woman who'd taken an impossible situation and made something powerful out of it. Even Tommy Miller, when Clara ran into him at the post office, offered a grudging smile. "You look happy," he said. "Really happy. I was wrong to try to stop the wedding. I see that now." "You were trying to protect me," Clara replied. "I appreciate that, even if it wasn't what I needed." "He's good to you?" "Nathaniel. He's wonderful to me." And saying it, Clara realized how completely true it was. Nathaniel had become her best friend, her confidant, her safe place. And somewhere along the way, she'd fallen in love with him without even realizing it was happening. That night, Clara found Nathaniel in his study, reviewing contracts. She walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, pressing a kiss to his temple. "Come to bed," she said softly. Nathaniel turned in his chair, surprise and hope warring in his expression. "Clara, I mean really come to bed. With me. Not separate rooms, not careful distance. I want to be your wife, Nathaniel. In every way. Are you sure?" His voice was rough. "Because once we cross that line, I don't think I can." Clara silenced him with a kiss. "I'm sure. I love you. I should have said it at Christmas, but I was scared. But I'm not scared anymore. I love you, and I want this. I want us." Nathaniel stood, pulling her flush against him. "I love you so much," he murmured against her hair. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear you say that." "Show me," Clara whispered. And he did. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Clara had thought she understood what marriage meant, what partnership looked like. But truly experiencing it was something else entirely. She and Nathaniel were inseparable now, sharing not just a house but a bed, a life, a future. They talked late into the night about everything, their dreams, their fears, their plans. Nathaniel wanted to expand the business, to create more jobs for the community. Clara wanted to start nursing school in the fall, to eventually open a clinic in Denali Ridge to serve people who couldn't easily get to Fairbanks for care. "We'll do both," Nathaniel declared. "Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." Clara began attending business meetings with Nathaniel, offering insights from her unique perspective. The workers respected her. She was one of them, after all, raised working class in a struggling town. She understood their concerns in ways Nathaniel, for all his good intentions, sometimes couldn't. At home, they blended their lives more fully. Clara moved her things into Nathaniel's room now. They redecorated together, mixing traditional Athabaskan art with pieces that reflected Clara's heritage. A quilt Ruby had made hung alongside woven blankets. Photos of both their families shared shelf space. It was a marriage now, a real one. Built not on obligation but on choice, on love, on the daily decision to choose each other despite everything that had tried to keep them apart. By February, Clara realized she'd stopped thinking about the divorce papers. They still existed, filed away somewhere in Nathaniel's office. But they'd become irrelevant, a safety net she no longer needed, a parachute for a fall she no longer feared. She was home. And home was Nathaniel, was the Amarok estate, was this life they were building together from the ruins of a forced beginning. One evening, she found Nathaniel in the workshop again, this time building something new instead of repairing something broken. "What is it?" she asked, running her hands over the smooth wood. "A cradle," Nathaniel said quietly. "I know we haven't talked about children yet, I know it's too soon, but I wanted to make it anyway. For some day. When we're ready." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Not sad tears, but tears of overwhelming joy. "It's perfect," she whispered. Nathaniel set down his tools and pulled her into his arms. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on us. For seeing past the obligation to the possibility. For choosing to stay even when you didn't have to." He pulled back to look at her. "You saved me, Clara. I was so lost, so trapped by duty and honor and grief. You showed me what it means to be free while still being committed. How to honor the past while building the future. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything first," Clara reminded him. "You gave me my freedom. My choice. My life back. And you gave it all to me anyway," Nathaniel said, wondering in his voice. "That's the gift, Clara. Not that you stayed because you had to, but that you stayed because you wanted to. That you chose me." They stood together in the workshop, surrounded by tools and sawdust and the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine. Outside, the winter darkness pressed close, but inside, they had everything they needed. Each other. And the love that had grown from the most impossible soil forced obligation transformed into genuine choice, duty blossomed into desire, a cage that had become wings. It was the kind of love that only comes from fire, Clara thought. The kind that's been tested and tried and proven true. The kind worth fighting for. The kind worth staying for. The kind that changes everything. Spring came late to Alaska, but when it finally arrived in April, it came with a vengeance. The snow began to melt, revealing earth that had been hidden for months. The days grew longer, the darkness retreating bit by bit. And with the changing season came changes in Clara and Nathaniel's life that neither had anticipated. Clara had been accepted into the nursing program at University of Alaska Fairbanks, set to begin in the fall. But more than that, she'd been offered a position as a community health advocate in Denali Ridge, a new program designed to bridge the gap between the hospital in Fairbanks and the isolated communities scattered across the region. It was perfect, allowing her to start making a difference while still pursuing her education. Nathaniel's business had recovered and then some. The changes Clara had suggested had streamlined operations so efficiently that profits were up 30%. He'd been able to give all his workers raises and improve their benefits. More than that, he'd started a scholarship fund for local students Athabaskan and non-Athabaskan alike who wanted to pursue higher education. The first recipient was Anna Chen from the post office, who'd been accepted to study communications in Anchorage. On a Saturday in late April, Clara woke to find Nathaniel already up, standing at the window and staring out at the melting landscape. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around herself and joining him. "About how different everything looks in the light," he said softly. "6 months ago, I was standing here dreading what was coming. Dreading forcing you into this marriage, dreading the disappointment I'd see in your eyes every day. Dreading a lifetime of pretending. And now?" He turned to her, his eyes warm. "Now I wake up grateful. Every single day, I'm grateful that somehow, against all odds, you chose me. That we found something real in the middle of all that obligation and pain." Clara leaned into him. "I'm grateful too. I spent so long being angry at my father for the debt, at your father for the arrangement, at you for going through with it. But now..." She paused, searching for the right words. "Now I think maybe it was all supposed to happen this way. Not the debt or the force, but us. Maybe we were meant to find each other, and this was just the universe's very messy way of making it happen." "You believe in fate now?" Nathaniel smiled. "I believe in us," Clara corrected. "And I believe that good people can make good things out of bad situations. We did that. Together." A knock at their bedroom door interrupted the moment. Naomi's voice called through, "Clara? Nathaniel? Ruby's here to see you both. She says it's important." They dressed quickly and found Ruby in the kitchen, holding a large envelope and looking slightly dazed. "Grandma? What's wrong?" Clara rushed to her side. "Nothing's wrong, baby. Everything's right, actually." Ruby set the envelope on the table. "This came for you and Nathaniel. From a lawyer in Fairbanks. I happened to be here visiting Naomi when it was delivered, and she thought I should be here when you opened it." Clara and Nathaniel exchanged confused glances. Nathaniel opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a thick stack of papers. As he read, his face went through a series of expressions of confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally something like awe. "What is it?" Clara asked, trying to read over his shoulder. Nathaniel set the papers down with shaking hands. "It's from Catherine. My ex-girlfriend. She's been investigating the original debt of your father's loan and she found something." "Found what?" "The loan was predatory," Nathaniel said slowly, still processing. "My father charged interest rates that weren't legal in Alaska at the time. If challenged in court, the debt would have been reduced to less than $20,000. Which means," he looked at Clara, then at Ruby. "Which means the arranged marriage clause would never have held up legally. We could have fought it. Could have won." The room went silent. Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why didn't anyone check this before? Why didn't your lawyers catch it?" "Because no one wanted to look that closely," Naomi said quietly, reading over Nathaniel's shoulder. "Thomas wanted the marriage to happen. The lawyers were told to make the contract as binding as possible, not to question its foundation. But Catherine did," Nathaniel continued, still stunned. "She's been working on this for months. She says in her letter that she was angry at first, though she was trying to find a way to break us up. But the more she dug, the more she realized the real injustice wasn't the marriage itself, it was the debt that never should have existed." He handed Clara a handwritten letter that had been in the envelope. Clara read Catherine's elegant script. "Nathaniel, I was wrong about you. I thought you were choosing obligation over love, tradition over doing what was right. But after months of research and reflection, I understand now that you were trying to honor multiple impossible commitments to your father, to your culture, and to Clara. You did the best you could in an impossible situation. The debt was predatory and illegal. I have documentation proving this. You could use it to dissolve the marriage, to free Clara completely, to undo everything. But I'm sending this to you both because I think you should make that decision together. From what I hear around town, you've built something real. Something chosen. Whether that started from obligation or not doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what you choose now. I'm happy for you both. Truly. Catherine. Clara read the letter twice, then set it down carefully. Her hands weren't shaking. She felt oddly calm, as if she'd been waiting for this moment without knowing it. So we could undo it all, she said quietly. The marriage, the obligation. We could start over completely. Yes. Nathaniel's voice was rough. If that's what you want. Ruby was crying silently, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Naomi had her hand over her mouth, watching them both with wide eyes. Clara looked at Nathaniel, her husband, her partner, her love. The man who had given her freedom when he could have kept her caged. The man who had honored his father while also honoring her humanity. The man she had chosen, day after day, to build a life with. Do you want to? She asked him. Undo it? No, Nathaniel said immediately. God, no. But Clara, this is your chance. Your real chance. Not the choice I gave you before with the divorce papers that was still choosing to stay in something forced. But this would make it like the forced marriage never happened. You could walk away completely free, completely vindicated. Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the estate that had become her home. She thought about the past 6 months, the fear, the anger, the slow transformation from resentment to curiosity to friendship to love. She thought about the prayer ties at the place of voices, about Ruby's wisdom, about Nathaniel's gift at the wedding that had shocked a town into silence. She thought about the cradle in the workshop, waiting for a future they'd build together. Then she turned back to face everyone, her decision clear. No, she said firmly. We're not undoing anything. Clara, Ruby started. No, Grandma. Listen. Clara moved to stand beside Nathaniel, taking his hand. Yes, the debt was illegal. Yes, we could have fought it. But we didn't know that then. We made choices based on what we knew, what we believed, what we thought we had to do. And those choices led us here. She squeezed Nathaniel's hand. I'm not going to erase the past 6 months. They made me who I am. They made us who we are. But you could have your old life back, Naomi said gently. Your freedom, your plans, everything you thought you'd lost. I don't want my old life back, Clara said with absolute certainty. I want this life. The one I've built with Nathaniel. The one where I'm part of this family, part of this community, part of something bigger than just myself. She turned to Nathaniel. Unless you want to undo it? Unless you'd rather start fresh, knowing the debt wasn't real. Nathaniel pulled her into his arms so fiercely it almost hurt. Never. Clara, I would marry you 100 times over, debt or no debt. You're my wife because I choose you, because I love you. Nothing about the debt changes that. Then it's settled, Clara said, her voice muffled against his chest. We keep the marriage. We keep everything we've built. And we use this information, she gestured to the papers, not to undo the past, but to make sure it never happens to anyone else. What do you mean? Ruby asked. Clara pulled back from Nathaniel, her mind already working. We use Catherine's research to expose predatory lending practices. We started a fund to help people in situations like my father's people who are desperate and don't know they're being exploited. We turned this painful history into something that protects others. The Thompson Amarok Foundation, Nathaniel said slowly, understanding dawning. We could focus on financial literacy, legal aid for families in debt, and protecting people from predatory lenders. Exactly. Clara's eyes were bright. We take the worst thing that happened to both our families and transform it into something that helps others. That's how we honor my father's memory and your father's mistake. That's how we make meaning out of all this pain. Ruby was crying harder now, but these were tears of pride. Your mama would be so proud of you, baby. So proud. Naomi hugged them both fiercely. This is what Thomas wanted, I think. Not the marriage itself, but these two families healing, building something new, creating bridges instead of walls. You've given that to him. To all of us. 3 months later, on a warm July evening, the town of Denali Ridge gathered at the community center for the official launch of the Thompson Amarok Foundation. Clara stood at the podium, Nathaniel beside her, and looked out at the crowd. She saw Ruby in the front row, beaming with pride. She saw Anna Chen, home from her first semester in Anchorage. She saw Tommy Miller and his family, genuinely happy for her now. She saw Athabaskan elders and white settlers, young families, and old friends, all gathered together. 6 months ago, Clara began, her voice steady. I was forced into a marriage I didn't want, to settle a debt I didn't owe, because of circumstances I couldn't control. I was angry. I was scared. I felt like my life had been stolen from me. She paused, letting the silence settle. But something unexpected happened. Instead of a cage, I found a partner. Instead of obligation, I found love. Instead of losing my future, I found a future I never knew I wanted. She looked at Nathaniel, who smiled encouragingly. That doesn't make what happened right. The debt was predatory and illegal. The forced marriage was wrong, no matter how it turned out. But it does mean that good people can make good choices even in bad situations. Clara gestured to the informational display set up around the room. The Thompson Amarok Foundation exists to make sure no one else faces what my family and I faced. We'll provide financial education, legal assistance, and direct aid to families struggling with debt. We'll fight predatory lending practices and advocate for stronger consumer protections. And we'll do it in honor of Samuel Thompson and Thomas Amarok, 2 men who made mistakes but who also loved their families fiercely. The crowd applauded, and Clara felt tears threaten. She blinked them back and continued. I want to thank my husband, Nathaniel, who showed me that honor means more than following rules, it means doing what's right even when it costs you everything. I want to thank his family, the Amaroks, for welcoming me not as an obligation but as one of their own. I want to thank my grandmother, Ruby, for teaching me that survivors make beauty out of ashes. She paused. And I want to thank Catherine Chen, who couldn't be here tonight but whose research made all of this possible. She proved that sometimes the people who walk away from us give us the greatest gifts. After the speeches, after the mingling and the celebration, Clara and Nathaniel slipped away to the parking lot for a moment of quiet. They stood by their truck, holding hands and watching the last light fade from the sky. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the debt had never existed? Nathaniel asked. If we'd just met normally. Clara considered. Sometimes. But honestly? I don't think we would have. You would have stayed in your world, I would have stayed in mine. We would have been ships passing, nothing more. So you're glad? For the debt, the marriage, all of it. I'm glad for us, Clara corrected. I'm glad we found each other, even if the path was painful. I'm glad we chose love when we didn't have to. That's what matters, not how we started, but how we continued. Nathaniel pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I love you, Clara Amarok. Thank you for choosing me every day. I love you too. And I always will. As they drove home to the estate, their home, their life, their future, Clara thought about the prayer tie she'd left at the Place of Voices all those months ago. She'd prayed for healing, for understanding, for courage. And she'd received all 3, just not in the way she'd expected. Life had taken her down a road she'd never wanted to travel. But at the end of that road, she'd found everything she'd never known she needed. A love forged in fire. A partnership built on choice. A future bright with possibility. And that, Clara thought as Nathaniel's hand found hers in the darkness, that was worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. If this cowboy's words touched your heart, then you belong here at the campfire. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another untold tale from the frontier. Drop a comment and let me know what this story meant to you. Tomorrow, we gather again with another powerful story of courage and heart. Until then, remember your worth is never defined by others. See you at the next campfire.